February the 1st. And good morning, my radio friends and friends of the Bible Institute of Los Angeles. This is Louis T. Talbot greeting you on this another day, and I do so in the wonderful name of our wonderful Lord and in behalf of the faculty and students of the Bible Institute of Los Angeles. Now, next week will be devoted to missions. I will have the opportunity of telling you something of the things that I saw during my fourth missionary journey that I have just concluded, and especially will I give to you information concerning the villages in India and the influence of communism in that land with its 400 millions of people. And then after the messages along missionary lines of next week, that we will begin a verse-by-verse study of another portion of the Word of God, and I think it will be the epistle of Paul to the Hebrews. I will have more to say about that next week. Now, I have in the studio with me this morning, once again, Dr. Bauman. Dr. Paul Bauman is the Vice President of Grace Theological Seminary in Winona Lake, Indiana. And this is the third discussion that he and I have had concerning Israel and countries like Egypt that are so much in the news today. You know, people wonder just what is going to be the end of this feud in the Arab countries that loom so large in our newspapers today. But you know, my friends, that the Bible is the most up-to-date book in the world. The Bible tells you of events before they take place. And the Bible lifts the veil that conceals from us the future and reveals to us present movements in the world today and how they are going to end. I wish that we could keep Dr. Bauman with us for another week. However, he'll have to be leaving our city to keep engagements that he has in the Middle West. And so our blessing will go with him, and we ask the Lord to richly bless his ministry as he goes along the Pacific coast and the Middle West. Now, my friends, in the last two broadcasts, Dr. Bauman and I have been discussing the situation in the Near West and its bearing upon Bible prophecy. The spotlight of the news today is centered upon the difficulties that exist between the Arab nations and the nation of Israel. Israel, as you know, is surrounded along its borders on three sides by these Arab countries. The difficulties are merely a continuation of an age-old feud that began with Isaac and Ishmael, sons of Abraham, and was continued more particularly between Jacob and Esau. Now, this feud will never be settled until Christ himself returns. Now, in our last two broadcasts, we discussed the prophetic background of Egypt, the Arab country which is in the news particularly today. Now, I think it might be well, Dr. Bauman, to say something about the other countries that lie along the borders of Israel. Now, what are these countries?
Well, Dr. Talbot, if we had a map of the Near East before us, we would see Egypt bordering Israel on the south and very slightly to the west of the Holy Land. Then south and somewhat east of Israel lies Saudi Arabia. Jordan, one of the most important of these Arab countries, in prophecy at least, borders Israel along the east from the north to the south of that country. On the north and northeast is Syria with Damascus as its capital. Then farther east is Iraq, the last of these Arab countries with which Israel today has to contend.
Now, as I recall it, Dr. Bauman, that you said the other day that Iraq is one of the nations mentioned in Isaiah chapter 19, which along with Israel and Egypt is to know a restoration at the close of this age. Now, Iraq is a modern name. What was this country called in ancient times?
The boundaries of Iraq, Dr. Talbot, include territory once occupied by two ancient empires, the Assyrian Empire with Nineveh as its capital, and Chaldea with Babylon as its capital. As a background for any adequate study of the present situation in that land, one should be familiar with the prophecies which concerned Nineveh and Babylon.
Now, this land that we are talking about has for centuries been one of the most desolate spots in the world. But it was not always that way. It must have been a most beautiful spot at one time, for it was evident that the Garden of Eden was located near the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, which even today flows through this land. The Chaldees, out of which Abraham came, was also located in this country. Am I correct in that, Dr. Bauman?
Yes, it was, Dr. Talbot. The land which we call Iraq today was the location of the oldest civilization in the world. It has continued through the centuries to be one of the most fertile spots in the world, but at the same time, this country has for many centuries been one of the most desolate lands to be found anywhere. That such is the case is not a matter of mere coincidence.
Now, these countries reached their present condition as a result of God's judgments which fell upon them because of their awful religious apostasy. Is that not correct, Dr. Bauman?
Yes, it certainly is. Take Nineveh, for example. This nation which bordered upon Israel had once possessed ample opportunity to know who the true God was. Yet Nineveh had rejected the light it had been given. As a result of this continued rejection, and because of the awful moral rottenness of its people, God instructed Jonah the prophet to go to Nineveh and predict its destruction. But Nineveh repented, and the city was spared. However, within little more than 100 years, Nineveh sank to even lower depths morally. It became almost probably the most bloodthirsty city of all time. The historians of today call the Ninevites the Huns of antiquity. The city was also devoted to gross idolatry, with all the licentiousness associated with idol worship. It was because of its final apostasy that God directed the prophets Nahum and Zephaniah to predict the complete overthrow of this mighty city and the desolation of the surrounding country.
Now, Brother Bauman, what judgments were predicted concerning this city of Nineveh?
Well, for a complete understanding of these, Dr. Talbot, one should study carefully the entire book of Nahum along with Zephaniah 1, verses 13 to 15. A complete answer to your question would take more time than we have opportunity to give on this broadcast. However, here are several interesting facts which stand out in a most remarkable way as we consider the prophecies bearing on the land of Assyria. The city of Nineveh was considered an impregnable fortress, with its great walls sufficiently wide that 3 chariots abreast could be driven around it. These walls contained 1,500 defense towers. There was an outer wall and an inner wall, with the river flowing between as a sort of a natural moat, which any invading army would be obliged to cross once they were fortunate enough, that is, to break through the outer wall. Even if this were possible, they would find it necessary to get through the inner wall before they could enter the city. How remarkable, therefore, was Nahum's prophecy that, and I quote, "the gates of the rivers shall be open, and the palace shall be dissolved." And as we read in chapter 2, verse 6, again, "the gates of thy land shall be set wide open unto thine enemies." And as we read in chapter 3, verse 13, history reveals, Dr. Talbot, and it has been amply confirmed by the discoveries of archaeology, that the city of Nineveh had been besieged for 5 years with little result. However, at flood tide, a portion of the walls fell into the river, creating an opening for the enemy, who entered the city in the manner described exactly by Nahum many years before it happened. Nahum had also said that fire should destroy the city. The calcinated ruins of the royal palace reveal today the abundant evidence as to the fact of Nineveh's destruction by fire.
And my friends, what a wonderful city and a great city Nineveh must have been. Dr. Bauman, what is the present condition at the site of Nineveh today?
Well, God said through Zephaniah in chapter 2, verses 13 and 14, that he would make Nineveh a desolation and dry like a wilderness. Now, the word desolation best describes the condition of nearly all of Iraq today. The prophet Zephaniah predicted in verse 14 that flocks shall lie down in the midst of her. And Dr. Talbot, when I arrived at the mound of Nineveh, the first sight to greet my eyes was that of shepherds grazing their flocks of sheep on the very spot where the proud city stood 2,500 years ago.
Well, this is certainly a most remarkable fulfillment of prophecy, Dr. Bauman. You know, it is a great thrill indeed to see the way that God has vindicated His word again and again. But tell me, was not the city of Babylon also located in this general area?
Yes, it was, Dr. Talbot. Nineveh was located in northern Iraq, as we call it today, and Babylon was located in the central part of the country. The prophecies which concerned Babylon are in some respects even more spectacular than those which spoke of Nineveh's destruction. Babylon was the mighty capital city of Chaldea in the days of Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar. The prophet Daniel had lived there through most of his lifetime. Again and again he had access to the presence of the king, who had every opportunity through Daniel's testimony and through his own experience to know the true God, but this city also turned its back upon the light which God had given it.
And my friend, what happened to Babylon as a result of its continued wickedness and rejection?
Well, in Isaiah 13, verse 19, God spoke these words, "Babylon, the glory of the kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldeans' pride, shall be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. It shall never be inhabited, neither shall it be dwelt in from generation to generation." The prophets Jeremiah and Ezekiel also said that Babylon was to become a desolation, and Dr. Talbot, the site of that city was one of the most desolate spots I had ever seen. Jeremiah said, "Cast her up as heaps and destroy her utterly. Let nothing of her be left." The word heaps best describes the condition of Babylon today.
Now, the prophecy we were discussing in connection with Nineveh said that the shepherds would raise their flocks upon the site of the city. Now, didn't one of the prophets have something to say about shepherds at Babylon also?
Yes, Dr. Talbot, and this is one of the most remarkable details of the prophecies which concern this city. In Isaiah 13, we read that the Arabians shall not pitch tent there, neither shall shepherds make their flocks to lie down there, but wild beasts of the desert shall lie there, and their houses shall be full of doleful creatures. There are hundreds of sheep on the site of Nineveh today, but none are to be found in Babylon. We might well ask, how did the prophets know this? And the answer, Dr. Talbot, is that they didn't know it. They were speaking as the mouthpiece of the eternal God, who alone is able to predict the future. Babylon for centuries has been uninhabited and desolate. There are so many traditions and superstitions among the Arabs that they'll not even pitch their tents at the site of the city. Thus another civilization went down to destruction and crumbled into ruin because it turned its back upon God.
Well, my brother, all of these prophecies are of tremendous interest and significance, especially in view of God's promise to restore in the latter days this country which we call today Iraq. God has said in Isaiah chapter 19 that the day would come when Israel shall be the third with Egypt and with Syria, even a blessing in the midst of the land, whom the Lord of hosts shall bless, saying, "Blessed be Egypt my people, and Assyria the work of my hands, and Israel mine inheritance." Now, a great many of us have been familiar with the prophecies that concern Israel as God's inheritance. But as we observed in our last broadcast, few people realize that the day will come when God will say, "Blessed be Egypt, my people, and Assyria, the work of my hands." Yet this prophecy clearly declares that the Lord has a definite work of restoration which He intends to accomplish in this part of the world during the latter days. Now, do any other prophecies indicate this, Dr. Bauman?
Yes, Dr. Talbot. Here is an unconditional covenant which God made to Abraham and his descendants nearly 40 centuries ago. And I read from Genesis 15, verse 18. "In the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, saying, Unto thy seed have I given this land, from the river of Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates. Now, this passage clearly indicates that Israel will someday possess all the land between the Nile River in Egypt and the Euphrates River in Iraq. Hence, we have in God's promise to Abraham another passage which proves beyond the shadow of a doubt that God's purpose for this country is yet to be more fully realized.
Well, this is one passage in the Bible which no Arab, either in Egypt or in Iraq, is prepared to accept at the present time. The events of the present day, which are now so much in the news, show, however, that even as we are now speaking, Israel is struggling against Egypt and the United Nations to maintain her hold on the Sinai Peninsula.
Yes, Dr. Talbot, and isn't it interesting that the Sinai Peninsula is not many miles from the Nile, and it is the very land which God pledged to Abraham nearly 40 centuries ago. The events of the present day in the Middle East should certainly cause the heart of any true child of God to throb with excitement as he sees the unfolding of God's purpose and his plan.
Well, Dr. Bauman, there is another Arab country lying immediately between Iraq and Israel. I believe it is called the Kingdom of the Jordan. Now, this country also covers a part of the area which God promised to Abraham and his descendants. Did the Old Testament prophets have anything to say about the country that we now call Jordan?
Yes, indeed, Dr. Talbot. There are many prophecies which concern not only the ancient people who lived there, but the Old Testament prophets also look forward to the restoration in the latter days. It might be of interest to our friends who are listening in if we would remind them that 3 ancient peoples lived in what is today called Jordan. In the northern part of Jordan, east of the Jordan River itself, were the Ammonites, descendants of Lot by his younger daughter. Immediately below the Ammonites were the Moabites, who were descended from Lot by his older daughter. The Bible reveals the tragic story that led to the rise of these 2 nations. On farther south, below the Dead Sea, were the Edomites, descended from Esau. Now, Petra was the capital city of Edom, and many of our friends have seen the pictures which we took at Petra several years ago. By the way, I shall never forget the way you scrambled around on the rocks of Petra. When you crawled up to the tomb of the monastery, as it is called, you nearly scared me to death, Dr. Talbot.
Well, I tell you that I almost died of weariness because that tomb or temple was called the Temple of the Urn, and I guess, Dr. Bauman, that we had climbed about 2,000 feet from the floor of the valley to get to that tomb. Now, I have been in a great many spots around the world, but I must say that the land of Edom and Petra are about the most desolate places that I have ever visited. The descendants of Esau also had known God. Why was Edom, with its capital city, Petra, laid so desolate as we see it today?
I believe, Dr. Talbot, that the Scripture is the clearest answer I can give to that question. The brief book of Obadiah deals entirely with the judgment that would come upon Edom, and it gives the reasons also for that judgment. We read, "The pride of thine heart hath deceived thee, O thou that dwellest in the clefts of the rock, whose habitation is on high, that saith in his heart, Who shall bring me down to the ground? Though thou exalt thyself as the eagle, and though thou set thy nest among the stars, thence will I bring thee down, saith the Lord." This passage indicates that Petra fell because of pride.
Well, the ruins of the gigantic temples of the city of Petra certainly display plenty of evidence to indicate that the people who dwelt in that area had become fabulously rich and proud and self-sufficient. We have visited many lands together, Dr. Bauman, but nowhere did we see anything to compare with the red rock wonders of this ancient city. Jeremiah said that the land would become a desolation, and that word desolation best describes the condition of that country today.
And it is significant to read in Obadiah verse 10 that the judgment fell upon Esau's descendants because of the violence against their brother Jacob, because they stood on the other side, as the text said, and stood in the crossway to keep Israel from passing through their country on the way from Egypt to the promised land. God said that Edom would be a perpetual waste and desolation.
Now, Doctor, the question that comes into our mind is this. Is there any indication that this country, the country of Edom, is to know a restoration at the close of this age?
No, I believe not, Dr. Talbot, for God said that Edom would cease from being a people forever. It was also to become a perpetual waste. And it is significant to know that there's no inclination on the part of anyone today to develop that desolate land, that is the land in that immediate area.
Now, a few moments ago, my brother, you said that the Moabites once lived in this Jordan country just to the north of the Edomites. Now, this country, too, because of its idolatries and persecution of God's people Israel, was to become a desolation. Now, you and I traveled through the land of Moab, from one end of it to the other, and we certainly verify the fact that the prophecies concerning Moab's desolation have been fulfilled to the very letter. However, isn't there a difference in the prophecies which concern the desolations of Moab from those of Edom?
Yes, there is, Dr. Talbot, and those differences, too, are significant in the light of present-day developments in the land of Jordan. Whereas Edom was to be a perpetual desolation, we read concerning Moab in Jeremiah 48, verse 47, these words, "Yet will I bring again the captivity of Moab in the latter days, saith the Lord." It is evident that this country is to have a restoration to its former condition of fruitfulness, and the Bible is very specific as to the time of this restoration. Jeremiah says it will occur in the latter days.
Now, is there anything being done at the present time to reclaim the land in the part of Jordan which once embraced the land of Moab?
Yes, Dr. Talbot, some work has been done, putting certain areas of the land under cultivation. The United Nations would like to do much more than the Arabs have been willing to let them do in this country. We've been hearing about the desire of the UN to settle the dispute between Israel and Jordan over the water rights of the Jordan River and other waters of that area. Israel has been willing to cooperate in the project to dam up the Jordan and use the waters now madly rushing toward the Dead Sea. But the Arabs have steadfastly refused to cooperate in this plan for the reclamation of their own land.
And the events of the last few years certainly do verify the possibility of that which the Bible predicts. Once water is cast out upon the thirsty soil, the desert country of Jordan will also join the land of Israel in blossoming as a rose. The dispute of which you have been speaking, Dr. Bauman, will never be fully settled until the Lord Jesus Christ comes. But we can certainly see the possibilities of such a restoration even at this present time. One other Old Testament nation was in the Jordan area, and perhaps we ought to mention the prophecies concerning the Ammonites, inasmuch as you and I have visited the ancient town of Ammon together several years ago. Now, wherein did the prophecies concerning Ammon differ from those of Moab?
Well, briefly, Dr. Talbot, this was the difference. Moab was to become completely a desolation. The Ammonite country was to remain a fruitful country according to Ezekiel 25, but it was to be delivered into the hands of invaders who would set their palaces there and enjoy the fruitfulness of the country.
And do you remember, my brother, the palace of the king of Jordan, which we saw on the hill overlooking the town of Ammon? As I recall, this was built about 30 years ago for a puppet king from the east who ruled over that people. And you may recall also that we visited in Ammon the old camel market, which witnesses to this day to the truth of Ezekiel's great prophecy, "I will make Rabbah a stable for camels."
Yes, and the town of Amman for centuries was little more than a stable for camels and a couching place for flocks, as Ezekiel said it would be. But the part that interests us concerning this part of the present Jordan country is the following promise of God recorded in Jeremiah 49, verse 6. "Afterward I will bring again the captivity of the children of Ammon, saith the Lord." you will note that God gave the same promise of restoration to this country in the latter days. And if time permitted, I could tell you some of the very interesting developments that have taken place in the restoration of that land during the interval of the 5 brief years between my first and second visits, Dr. Talbot. Probably the most significant, however, has been the growth of the city itself. Less than 50 years ago, Amman was a miserable little Arab town with a population of about 250. But during the past few years, it has grown to become the largest city in that area, with a population of more than 250,000. Today, Amman is the capital of Jordan.
Well, my friends, I'm looking at the clock and I note that our time is gone. But you know that we have been dealing this morning with Arab countries, and these Arab countries are divided into 3 or 4 divisions. And we have been dealing with them in the light of prophecy. Now, prophecy mentions all of these Arab countries, how that they were great in the past and how the judgment of God fell upon them because of their idolatries. And those judgments, the evidence of them, we see them today, and how that someday that God is going to settle that dispute. And while an attempt is being made by the United Nations to bring about a settlement, what settlement comes will only be temporary, because the final settlement will never be known or brought about until the Lord Jesus, whose right it is to rule and to reign, will return to this earth and not only deal with those Arab countries, but every country in the world. My friends, I trust that our discussion has not been too involved, and I trust that you have been benefited as a result of it. I wish again that we could keep Dr. Bauman here for another week, but one of these days, if the Lord tarry, he'll be coming our way, and then we'll get him before this microphone again. All right, the Lord bless you. Tune in tomorrow. Goodbye, and God bless you all.
Thanks for the privilege of being on it.
Well, that's been a great